now that we know how to graph inequalities, let's look at how we can write an inequality from looking at a graph. So, when we write an inequality by looking at a graph, we need to follow the following steps. So let's read through the steps first and then we'll do it together. So find the y-intercept is the first step. Then the second step, determine the slope by locating the next point. Now remember, when you're locating the next point, you want to make sure that it's an actual intersection. Let's write that down. So you want to make sure that it actually is a point that's on an actual grid intersection. Then we look at the line. So the next part is looking at the line itself. So is the line dotted or solid? If it is dotted, the sign will be either greater than or less than. If the sign is solid, the sign is going to, if it's a solid line, the line is solid, the sign will be greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. Okay, so once we've determined whether it's going to be with or without the equal to sign, we're going to look at the shading. And when we look at the shading, we ask ourselves, is the shading above or below the line? If it's above the line, the sign will be greater than or equal to. If it's below the line, the sign will be less than or equal to. Okay. So let's try this. All right. So again, I'm going to keep my directions up here. The first step says to find the y-intercept. Okay, that is where the line crosses the y-axis. And in this case, my y-intercept is right here at -2. So I'm going to put my b equals -2. Because remember, in my formula, y equals mx plus b, b is my y-intercept. So my b equals -2. Now, I'm going to go from -2 and I'm going to find the next dot or the next point of intersection. And I can see right here that this point crosses at 2, 1. And in order to get to that point, I go up 1, 2, 3. So up 3 over 1, 2 over 2. Okay? And remember that that's my slope. And I want my slope to be in the form of a fraction. So this is good. And remember, my slope is m. So in this case, m equals 3 over 2. Remember, it's rise over run. So my m is 3 over 2. And that's that part of the formula. Now, if this weren't an inequality, I could stop there and I could write my equation to say y equals my m, 3/2 x minus 2. If this were just a line on a graph without any shading, I could say y equals 3/2 x minus 2. But this is an inequality. There is shading, so we have to look at a couple more things. So now my directions tell me to look at the line. Is it dotted or solid? So looking at the line right here, I can see that my line is dotted, which means it's not going to have an equal to part in it. It's just going to be either greater than or less than. Okay? Now my directions tell me to look at the shading. Is it above or below the line? And if I look at the area that's shaded in red, it is below the line. So my shading is below. And below tells me that it's either going to be less than or equal to. But we know it's not less than or equal to because we have a dotted line. So we're not even going to look at that. So that tells me right now that my inequality is going to be written using less than. So when I go to write my inequality, we're going to plug everything in right here. Let's see. Oops. Sorry. Y is less than, and then everything else stays the same. 3/2 x minus 2. And that's my answer. Y is less than 3/2 x minus 2. So now, if I were to reverse it and I said, okay, graph y is less than 3/2 x minus 2, I know to graph my y-intercept first, or my b, which is right here, my b. I would graph that first, which would be right here, where I had it before. And then my slope was 3/2. So I went up 1, 2, 3 over 1, 2. There's my slope. And it's dotted line, and it's shaded under. It is less than. Okay, so that was my B. Let's just go ahead and I'll label my M just so there's my M. So that's the inequality for this graph. Okay, let's do another one together. This didn't come out right. That's okay. All right, so I'm looking here, and the first thing I need to find is my B. Let's put it up here. B equals, and in this case, B is right here. So B is -3. Then I look to find my slope, and I'm going to find where my graph crosses at a point. I don't want it right here because I don't really know what that point is. So I want to use a point that's like an intersection. So right here is an intersection. All right, from I'm looking for my M now. So from my B, I'm going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So up 5. And I'm going to the left 1. That makes it -1. So I have let's write it this way. 5 over -1. Or -5 over 1, or even just -5. All right, so now I have my B, or my M, and I have my B. So now I ask myself, is my line dotted or solid? And it is dotted. And I know that that means it's either going to be greater than or less than, no equal to. And then I look at my graph and determine where the shading is taking place. And in this case, it's taking place below the line. That means it's going to be less than or equal to. Okay? And I know it's not equal to because my dotted tells me that there's no equal to involved. So it's going to be less than. So now I can go up and I can write my inequality. Y is less than my m, negative 5x minus 3. Okay, and again, here's where my 3 came from. Here's where my 5 came from. And my inequality is less than without the equal to because it's a dotted line shaded below. Okay, I want you to try this one and turn this in after you have completed this final one. It's a solid line, so let's give you a couple hints here. There's a solid line. The line is solid. And the shading is below the line. Oops. Okay. So write the inequality for that, turn this in, and you can do your practice work for this assignment.